right, so so we've talked about sort of general taxonomy and classification and the rules and species and binomial nomenclature and dichotomous keys. But now where we go from here is we start to get more specific and talk about some of the actual groups of organisms that we use in that classification system. So we'll talk in general about some of the kingdoms and just mention them pretty briefly. Other kingdoms we're going to spend a lot more time on. So that's where we're going in the next couple weeks. So there are 6 kingdoms. All living things are in one of those kingdoms. Starting with the easiest one.
Animal.
So feel free to give this guy some shorts or something.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that. We do not like.
Not sure why he's in rough shape. He has no clothes. This fish is biting him in the side. The bird's pecking his eyes. Gonna get attacked by a snake, and the mouse is looking at him awkwardly. So I don't know about that guy. But anyway, yeah, that's the animal kingdom.
There we go. I just short time. You're welcome.
Thanks. Come
Give
to
my
shorts.
ass. I don't need the shirt.
All right, then obviously, if we go clockwise here, we have the plant kingdom. I've been called this many times. Next kingdom, fungi.
I got that.
Fungi. Yeah,
I
fungi.
get that.
Yeah, good job. Good
Thanks,
job.
Mel.
So slow. Okay, up here, sorry man. Up here, we have some single-celled living organisms. These are what we call protists. We're going to spend a little time studying a few different protists. And then the last, this is
Bacterial.
actually, this is bacteria. And then sort of next to it, because this little image was made before people really used the 6th kingdom. So it's not really a picture there, but it's archaea. You can put it next to bacteria. And so what we're going to talk about next is, well, what determines if a living organism is a protist versus an animal versus a fungus versus a bacteria? What do we use to sort of sort and classify organisms into these kingdoms? We're going to talk about 3 main criteria for putting things into different kingdoms. The first is presence of a nucleus. Okay? When we talked about cells, we just sort of labeled simple plant and animal cells, and they had a nucleus in them which contained the DNA and so forth. But there are some types of living organisms where they don't have a nucleus. They don't have DNA surrounded by a nuclear membrane. Okay? So the words are prokaryote and eukaryote. If we look at the roots of those words, pro, like in a book, where's the prologue?
Before.
Yeah, it's like it comes before like the main part of the story begins. Pro means before. This prefix eu, eu, that means true. And this root, karyote, has to do with the nucleus. So a prokaryote, so the words mean before nucleus.
No nucleus.
These are the cells that have no nucleus. They're simple cells. They also don't have other membrane-bound organelles. These were the first organisms to evolve on Earth, were prokaryotes. Very simple, generally pretty small cells with no nucleus. So if they don't have a nucleus, they still have DNA. It's just not enclosed within a nuclear membrane. It's sort of spread throughout the cytoplasm. Eukaryotes, on the other hand, okay, they do have a nuclear membrane. They're more complex cells. They have other membrane-bound organelles like chloroplast and mitochondria and so forth. So those are the 2 sort of categories we put living things in. Are they prokaryotes or eukaryotes? To help you remember, what I usually tell people is eu rhymes with do, because eukaryotes do have a nucleus. Pro rhymes with no, because prokaryotes have no nucleus. We also can think about how many cells make up a living organism. Some organisms are unicellular, others are multicellular. What does unicellular mean? Dave?
One cell.
One cell. So they're just a single-celled living organism. Like unicycle, so one wheel. And so then, obviously, multicellular organisms have many cells. Okay? So that's our next category. How many cells make up these organisms? Our third category has to do with obtaining energy. We classify organisms as either heterotrophs or autotrophs. You guys know what those words mean? What is an autotroph? Raise your hand if they tell me
Well, I know.
what an autotroph is.
I know.
Well, all right, so be quiet.
It makes its food for itself.
Yeah, it makes its own food through photosynthesis. Okay. Things like plants are autotrophs. And then a heterotroph. Luke?
It does make its own food, so it has to eat out of it.
Yeah, it has to consume other organisms. It cannot make its own food, so it has to find organisms to eat in order to get energy. So, an ant, a human are heterotrophs. And those are the main criteria that we use to categorize things. There's some others, but that's, for our purposes, those are the three things we're going to think about as we talk about the various kingdoms. So we'll start with the ones you're most familiar with, the animal kingdom. So, before we reveal this, what do you, tell me about those three characteristics. How about presence of a nucleus? Do animals in their cells have a nuclear membrane surrounding their DNA?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, they are. So what would we call them? What's the word we're going to use? Eukaryotes. Are they unicellular
No.
or multicellular? Multicellular. And are they autotroph or heterotroph? Animals are actually the largest kingdom of identified species, in that scientists have categorized the most animals. However, that's probably due to the fact that they're larger than protists or bacteria and so forth. They're multicellular, eukaryotes, heterotrophic. So there's a lot of examples we can list, from spiders to humans to dogs. Even some things maybe you may not think of as animals, a sponge, a starfish. Those are also animals, and we'll be talking about them more extensively next week probably when we can. All right, another group we're all familiar with, plants. Let's talk about, so raise your hand if you can tell me, number of cells, what word will we use to describe them? Sophia?
The
Multicellular. How about presence of a nucleus? What word will we use for them? Evan Ziegel? Eukaryote. And how about nutrition? What word will we use, Karina? Autotroph. So plants are multicellular. They're made of many cells. They're eukaryotes. Inside of their cells, they do have a nuclear membrane surrounding their DNA. And they're autotrophic. They can make their own food. Plants don't have to eat other organs. So, trees, corn, mosses, grass. These are all plants. that may be somewhat obvious, but you probably are less familiar with things like fungi and protists and bacteria and archaea. So fungi. The thing you're probably most familiar with are mushrooms, are fungus. Okay. So what do you think about number of cells? Who wants to take a guess or give me your thoughts? Luke?
Multi?
They're multicellular, yes. But there are certain types of fungi that are unicellular. In fact, there are certain types of fungi unicellular that you probably consume almost every day. How many people had a bagel this morning? Toast.
I think
An English muffin. What do they call those little things in an English muffin? You ever hear in a commercial?
bread.
Old commercial. Nooks and crannies. You ever hear that? Those little bubbles and rough surface. Why is it like that? Why you slice a loaf of bread? Why are there little air bubbles in there? Why, when you need some dough to make bread and then you leave it for a little while, it rises?
Oh, yeast?
Yeast. Yeast are a type of fungus.
Yeast babies. Yeah.
Or yeast baby.
So we use yeast.
Yeah. Fungi, we'll talk more about yeast in a little bit. Fungi are also eukaryotes. They do have a nucleus in their cells. And they're also heterotrophs. So sometimes people make the mistake and think like a mushroom is a plant. It is not. Mushrooms cannot undergo photosynthesis.
They decompose.
What do they eat?
They eat the dirt.
Not quite the dirt, but you're on the right track, Dave.
They eat like decomposed remains.
Oh, yeah, they eat like the dead.
Yeah, we call that stuff like organic matter, little bits of leaves and trees and plants and dead animals that are in the soil. They break down those things. They're decomposers.
Yeah, like worms.
Not, I don't know. Maybe I guess. So examples of fungi are yeast, mushrooms, also mold,
Yay.
like red mold or black mold, grows in damp areas, mildew. The next kingdom are the protists. The protist kingdom is a weird kingdom. It's sort of like a garbage category where scientists put organisms that don't quite fit in anywhere else. So it's got some strange characteristics. Protists are generally unicellular. They're eukaryotes as well. Some are heterotrophic, some are autotrophic. We're going to be looking at some slides of protists next week. We're going to look at this one, an amoeba, this one, a paramucium, and this one, a euglena. That brings us to our last two kingdoms, bacteria and archaea.
Like, can you go back to the Can you work the other one?
Not right now.
I have to see it. I think I missed one.
Let's get from that. All right, so bacteria are generally really small.
Oh, no, I know.
They're unicellular organisms. And they are prokaryotes. So bacteria are the first kingdom we've mentioned that are prokaryotes. So they have very simple cells. Their DNA is just located in the cytoplasm, not enclosed in a nuclear membrane. And there are some bacteria that are heterotrophic, some that are autotrophic. Can anyone name a specific type of bacteria?
Oh, we know, I forgot what it was. Chicken.
Oh, algae.
No?
Wait.
Kane?
Diseases, right? Most. diseases caused by bacteria?
There are some, but I'm looking for the name of a specific bacteria. Once I say a couple, you'll recognize them. Got Tom?
Salmonella?
Salmonella, which could cause food poisoning. E. coli.
Ebola.
How about a bacteria that can cause a sore throat? Streptococcus bacteria. Yep. So those are types of bacteria.
Exactly. Botulism.
Right? All right, and then, cyanobacteria, these are autotrophic bacteria.
So you mean they eat us?
Isn't there one in like the sea, a bacteria in the sea?
Yeah, there's lots of bacteria in the sea. And that brings us to our last kingdom, Archaea. And the Archaea kingdom is a pretty recent addition to classification. And Archaea are unicellular. They may sound similar to bacteria because they're also prokaryotes. They're also can be heterotrophic or autotrophic. But they have some distinct differences in their DNA, in their cell walls. And they were discovered living in places where scientists thought nothing could possibly live. Some types of archaea are called extremophiles because they tend to live in very extreme conditions.
Radioactive?
So they can live in areas that are extremely hot, in geysers.
Could they live in volcanoes?
So, I don't know about volcanoes. So, scientists thought nothing could survive the temperatures of these geysers.
What's so old for?
But when they looked more closely, they found these thermophiles, this type of archaea that can actually survive there. Some can live in extremely salty conditions that scientists thought life couldn't exist.
Radioactive?
In very acidic conditions. So there's all these different sort of extreme environments that scientists have found these archaea living in. When we think about all species that have been sort of identified, like I said, the majority are animals. So almost 3/4 of identified species here are animals. Over half are insects.
Wow.
Plants are the next largest group. And then the others, the fungi and bacteria, protists and so forth, make up these smaller sections that you see here.
The smallest one is like the viruses.
Yeah, and viruses, it's debatable as to whether or not they're considered alive. All right. So we sort of summarize here. How do they obtain food? Animals. What's the word we're going to use, Evan Kane?
What they eat food.
What's that?
Don't they don't make their own food.
Correct. So what's the word we're going to use for those type of things? Evan? Correct. Heterotrophs. How many cells are animals composed of? Julia?
Thousands and stuff.
Yeah, so what word do we use?
Oh, not got it. Oh, it's coming.
Sophia? They're multi-cell. Oh, we're going to go across, sorry. Plants, how do they obtain energy? What's the word we're going to use? Gabe?
Autotroph.
Autotroph. How about fungi? How do they obtain nutrition? Bad.
Heterotrophs?
Or heterotrophs. Protists. How do protists obtain nutrition? Jack?
Heterotrophs or autotrophs?
They can be either, yes. Yep, they can be both heterotrophs or autotrophs. How about bacteria? Kim? Both. How about archaea? Both. Correct. How many cells are they composed of? So are they unicellular, multicellular? Will, animals? Multicellular. Plants, I want to hear from some new people here. There's a couple people I've not seen your hand in the air. It's probably getting tired resting on your desk. Bella,
Multicellular.
what's that?
Multicellular.
Also multicellular. Fungi, Trina? Both. Protists. Jackson.
Oh, no, both.
Unicellular.
Oh, I was right the first time.
Bacteria, Julia. Archaea, Titana. Unit. Eukaryote and prokaryote. Animals, Matt.
Eukaryote.
Yes. Plants. Have it? Yes. Fungi. Rena? Protists. Okay?
Isn't that prokaryote?
Nope.
Well, that's the next one.
Are eukaryotes. Bacteria. Mag? Prokaryote. In archaea? Well, also prokaryote. All right. So those are our general characteristics. Now, at the beginning of class, I asked you about the kingdoms. What's the level above kingdom?
Domain.
Domains. Do you remember how many domains there were? Three. So all living species are in one of three domains. Okay? So it's a group larger than kingdom. Can anyone guess? Someone's already showed us, I guess. So all of these organisms, animals, plants, fungi, and protists, all of those kingdoms are in one of the domains. It's called eukarya. Then bacteria are in their own domain, sometimes called monera. We're going to call it bacteria. And then archaea are in a separate domain. So those are the three domains, archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. So why are animals, plants, fungi, and protists all together? Who? They're all eukaryotes. That's what put them together in that single domain. If we look at a few different organisms, a human, a chimp, a cat, a lion, a housefly, and look at how they are classified, you could see their domain all the way down through species. So all those organisms on the same domain are also all animals. So they're same kingdom as well. Once we go down to phylum, they start to become a little bit different. Okay? These four are all chordates, vertebrates. However, the housefly is an invertebrate, it's called an arthropod. And we go down again, these are all mammals. Housefly is an insect. As we continue on, we can see the classification of each of these. So what's the scientific name of a human?
Homo
So you
sapiens.
guys know that one. Write it down. What do we need to do with it? Or underline it. How about our capitalization? The genus is capitalized. The species is
No.
right, it's lowercase of 5. TM, copyright. To use that word, it's 25 cents a use.
What?
Goes on your bill at the end of the school year. lowercaseify. I invented that word in copyright and trademark.
Lowercase fine, lowercase fine, lowercase fine, lowercase fine.
What? All right, it's gonna go on your bill. The microphone picks it up and automatically adds it onto your lowercaseify is my word. I have another word I also invented that.
I'm gonna need to see some patents.
It's called-
documentation.
So it's called, the other word I invented, it's like aerodynamic, you know what aerodynamic is? But in the water, like a shark,
Water documentation.
its shape is aquadynamic.
Ooh.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, anyway,
Some
Well,
dictionary.
that sounds like an
that's
idea.
35 cents a use. All right, somebody tell me the scientific name for chimpanzee. Raise your hand, please.
Yeah, I know.
Jack.
Pan troglodytes.
Pan troglodytes. How about a house cat? Ned? Felis catus. A lion. Raise your hand, please. Then I'll call your name. Then you could say some words giving me the answer. Sophia. Felis leo. And a fly, a house fly, Gabe. Musca domestica.
That sounds like
Spanish.
So, all of these are in what taxonomic group? They all are in the same what?
Eukaryote.
Domain and kingdom. So, what does that mean about them? Which of these characteristics do they all have? Raise your hand if you can tell me. Which do they all have? Vlad?
They're multicellular, they're eukaryotes, and they're heterotrophs.
Correct.
How so
Which two organisms are the most closely related out of these? Most closely related. Bella?
The two, the house cat and the lion,
Yes. House cat and lion. How did you know that?
because they,
Yes.
so they're both they both have similarities farther than, the human and the chimp do and housefly do.
Yeah. They're similar all the way down to what?
Genus.
So they're in the same genus. They're different species, but they're in the same genus, meaning they're pretty closely related. More closely related than any of the other species that are listed. All right, we're going to stop here for a minute.
Ebola.
No, what?
No.